little, for lack of a better description, I'm going to call it a Paul Harvey rest of the story for you. How many enjoyed Paul Harvey? May he rest in peace. What a great American. What a great American, a great Christian. Amen. He was indeed, Paul Harvey. I want to draw a true story. I say a true story from the pages of history. I want to share a story about Butch O'Hare and Easy Eddie. Anybody ever heard of those two characters? Butch O'Hare and Easy Eddie. World War II produced many great, incredible stories, produced many heroes. But one of those heroes was Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. Butch O'Hare was a fighter pilot, flew for the United States Navy off of an aircraft carrier called the Lexington in the South Pacific. On this particular day, the entire squadron of fighters took off from the aircraft carrier Lexington, and a short time after Butch O'Hare, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, a short distance away, he looked down and recognized that someone had forgotten to top off the gas tanks on his aircraft. He immediately reported it to the commander of the mission, recognizing that he would not have enough fuel to complete the mission and return to the aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare's flight leader immediately gave him the command to return to the aircraft carrier. Lieutenant Commander O'Hare was very greatly disappointed. But in following the instructions of his squad leader, he made a U-turn and started back toward the Lexington. As he was flying back toward the Lexington, he observed off to his left a group of Japanese airplanes that were headed toward the Lexington with the intent to blow it out of the water. There were no more aircraft, no more airplanes on the Lexington to rise up and fight those Japanese planes. Immediately, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare recognized what he had to do, and he single-handedly took on the entire Japanese squadron of airships. He proceeded to do battle with them, and one after another, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare shot down the Japanese airplanes. After shooting down no less than 5 of the Japanese airplanes, Butch O'Hare was out of ammunition. And Butch O'Hare recognized that he needed to do something. And he went into flying maneuvers with the intent and the design of clipping a wing or clipping off the tail with his very own aircraft. After engaging in this activity for a brief period, unexplainably, the Japanese turned their aircraft around and flew back from the direction that they came. Deeply relieved, Butch O'Hare and his tattered fighter limped back to the Lexington. Upon arrival at the Lexington, he reported in and related the events surrounding his return. There was a camera on board that aircraft, and it recorded Butch O'Hare's heroics. He had destroyed 5 enemy bombers. That was on February the 20th, 1942. For that action, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare received the Navy's first ace of World War II, and he was the first naval aviator to win the Congressional Medal of Honor. A true American hero. 1 year later, Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare, at the tender age of 29, was killed in combat. But his hometown would not allow his memory of that heroic action to die. Today, if you enter into his home city of Chicago by airplane, you will land at O'Hare Airport, named after Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. And there, between 2 of the hangars, I guess you call them, between hangar or terminal number 1 and number 2, there is a statue and a Medal of Honor in Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare's name. Some several years before that, there was another man who lived in Chicago. His name was Easy, or he was called Easy Eddie. At that time, Al Capone was head of the crime syndicate in Chicago. Al Capone was never heroic or noted for his heroics in anything. His exploits were anything but praiseworthy. Al Capone was notorious for enmeshing the city of Chicago in everything from bootleg whiskey to prostitution to murder. Easy Eddie was Al Capone's lawyer and mouthpiece for a very good reason. Easy Eddie was very, very good at what he did. In fact, Easy Eddie's legal maneuverings kept Al Capone out of jail for a long time. In appreciation to Easy Eddie, Al Capone paid him very, very handsomely. Easy Eddie lived in a mansion surrounded by, it was gated with security. And Easy Eddie made big money. Eddie got special dividends, a fenced-in mansion, live-in help, all the convenience of the day. The estate was so large that it filled an entire city block. Easy Eddie lived the high life of the Chicago mob and gave little consideration to the atrocities that Al Capone was committing all around him. But Easy Eddie had one soft spot. Easy Eddie had a son that was absolutely the apple of his eye. Easy Eddie saw to it that everything his son wanted, he got. The best of everything. Clothes, a good education, cars. Nothing was withheld from his son. Price was no object. Eddie even tried to teach his son right from wrong. He wanted him to be a better man than he was. But yet, with all of Easy Eddie's wealth and all of his influence, there were 2 things that he couldn't give him. Eddie had sacrificed to the Capone mob what he could not pass on to his own beloved son: a good example and a good name. One day, Easy Eddie made a decision. He decided that he was going to tell the authorities everything about Scarface Al Capone. He went to the authorities and in an attempt to clean up his tarnished name and regain some sense of integrity, he had to testify against Al Capone and the mob. And even though he knew the cost was going to be very, very great, he wanted to do his best to make restoration and leave a good name for his son. So Easy Eddie testified. Within the next year, Easy Eddie's life was ended in a blaze of gunfire as he was murdered by the mob on a Chicago street. He had given his son the greatest gift that he had to offer at the greatest price he would ever have to pay. How do these two separate and different stories, what do they have to do with each other? Well, it turns out that Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare was Easy Eddie's son. And now you know the rest of the story. The wise man Solomon in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 1 said, "A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and having favor rather than silver and gold." The Living Bible renders that verse, if you must choose, take a good name rather than great riches. For to be held in loving esteem is better than silver or gold. The Message Bible renders that verse, "A sterling reputation is better than striking it rich. A gracious spirit is better than money in the bank." The wise man said again in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 1, "A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth." Even reading from the Apocrypha, the wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, "A good life is but a few days, but a good name endures forever." What's in a name? When I say the name Adolf Hitler, what comes immediately to your mind? What about Joseph Stalin, or maybe even Saddam Hussein? What about the names of Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, Timothy McVeigh? What about Osama bin Laden? What about Judas Iscariot? In the days of Jesus, Judas was a very common and a very popular name. I don't think I've ever met anyone in all of my life named Judas. Which of you could or would have named your son Judas? A good name is better than precious ointment. I read how that in Oklahoma City, after the bombing by Timothy McVeigh, I read that the Ryder truck rental company in that entire city changed the color of their big yellow trucks to white because they did not want, though they had nothing to do with it, they did not want their company name associated with the crimes of Timothy McVeigh. The Apostle Paul, he was named Saul prior to his conversion. Saul had committed many egregious acts toward the new Christian church and the followers of Jesus Christ. Paul perhaps did not want to be associated with his former identity. Or maybe he did not want to be known or named after the very first king of Israel who died in some infamy. A name. We rarely hear the name of Adolf because of the reputation that goes with the name. There was a TV special on some time ago, and they were interviewing members of the Hitler family, many who now live in the United States, but everyone have changed their name. I can only wonder what would happen to someone named Hitler in downtown Ocklackney, or Pelham, or Camilla, or Thomasville. I would doubt that he would have difficulty fitting in, having a place of business, teaching children in school. I dare say there would be problems. Companies spend millions and even billions of dollars on TV commercials trying to convince us how good their products are, so we will trust them. I wonder how many of us would trust Enron. How many of us would trust Martha Stewart? Or what was the guy's name? Madoff? That made off with so much of the retirement funds of so many? To get a good name, you must be a person of character. What is character? Well, I learned and discovered some time ago that character is determined by what you would do in secret if you knew that nobody would ever find out about it. Ouch. Character is built. Character is earned. A good reputation does not just automatically fall into place. We must be trustworthy. We must have integrity. We must be a person of good character. Our name represents who we are. We as Christians have taken the name of Jesus. That's why it's so important. Of how we live. I read of a man who, pastor in one of the northern cities that visited Panama City some number of years ago. And the pastor stayed in one of those resort hotels, 1,000, 1,500 miles away from home. 1,000, 1,500 miles away from the members of his congregation. 1,000, 1,500 miles away from his deacon board. And the pastor decided this particular evening he would go down and sit in the lounge and just listen to some music. No harm in that. And as he was sitting there, he determined that he will have a martini. The waitress came over and said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Yes, I'd like to have a martini, please." And the waitress said, "Will that be with an olive or without an olive, Reverend?" He asked, how did you know that I was a minister? I have a sister who lives in your city who attends your church. Be careful, little feet, where you go. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. For the Father up above is looking down in love. We need to do everything that we can that we can have a good testimony. For we carry his name. We are his ambassadors. We represent him, and we need to be men and women of character. It's been more than a few times in my ministry, and yes, even since I've been in Thomasville, there have been those that have been rude to me in various settings, various circumstances, various locations. And though you may think otherwise, I am just a man. I have feelings. I have emotions. I get hurt. I get angry. Most of the time, I can contain my emotions. Most of the time, I can contain my anger. For the wise man said, if a man controls his spirit, he can take a city. I came to Thomasville to take a city for the glory of God. But at the end of the day, I'm still a man. And that's when my wife says, Phil, remember, you're the pastor at Parkway. I sat in a doctor's office not long ago. My appointment was thus and so. There was one other person in the whole of the waiting area. I'd been there about 10 minutes. They called that person back. I sit for another 30 minutes. And the sign on the wall says, if you have waited longer than 15 minutes for your appointment, please let someone at the desk know. I went up and very nicely said, my name is. I had an appointment at. The sign says if you've waited 15 minutes. It is now 35 minutes and I'm still waiting. And no offense to those of you that work in that area, but the lady gave me the normal song and dance. I'm so sorry, sir, for your wait. The doctor's running just a little bit behind today. Call me crazy. But when there's nobody else around, there's nobody in the waiting and haven't been for 20 minutes. I think it's probably a little more than just running behind. I think he is neglecting me. Can I just be honest and tell you, I don't like to be neglected. I don't like to wait 15 minutes in line at McDonald's or Hardee's or Burger King or whatever, only to get up there to the window and get my sandwich with mayonnaise all over it. I am human. And it's even worse if I bite into it. I said, okay, I'll go back and wait. I waited 20 more minutes. It was 25 minutes till the next hour. I walked up and I said, it is now 5 minutes until. My appointment was an hour ago. He's got 5 minutes. And if he doesn't get out here and somebody doesn't take care of me, I'm leaving. Now, I know that's, Brother Leo, I know that's what you call cutting off your nose to spite your face. I know that because I know that I would have only had to have gone back and waited again the next time. I watched my watch. And 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and so help me with my hand up. On the 5th minute, I have gotten up out of my seat and I am reaching for the door. And the nurse calls my name. I am furious. You're the pastor at Parkway. You're the pastor. Joyce wasn't with me. She wasn't with me. The Holy Spirit saying, you're the pastor at Parkway. You're the pastor at Parkway. You're the pastor at Parkway. You are the pastor at Parkway. I bit my lip. I went in. Not even 2 minutes was he with me. Not even 2 minutes. But here's the bottom line, Darrell. I maintained my integrity. I maintained my character. I maintained my testimony. And you find somebody in Thomasville that says, I've been ugly or rude to them, and I'd like to go and sit down and buy them a cup of coffee, because it is not true. You see, a good name is more precious than ointment. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. Bill Clinton, when he was running for second term of president, said character does not matter. Let me get it on the record loud and clear. Character absolutely does matter, and I don't care who you are, what your politics are, or what church you are the pastor of. A good name is better than ointment. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. Jesus said, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying a good name is what we are trying to grow and what we are trying to build here in Thomasville, and character matters. Don't forget Lieutenant Commander Butch O'Hare. Don't forget Easy Eddie. And remember, these children need us to be good examples. Grandma, Grandpa, Mom, and Dad. The children are watching us. Good friend of mine pastored for a number of years in West Virginia. In fact, he and my mother preached their first revival together. Boyd England was his name. Wife's name was Beatrice. Beautiful people. 2 children, Pamela and Rodney. And they went to church. He pastored and went to church on this occasion. And Rodney was talking to some of the members. And they asked Rodney, he was just a small lad, and said, Rodney, does your mom and dad ever have arguments? Do they ever have fights? And Brother England had taught Rodney and Pam to tell any of the church members, Mom and Daddy don't have fights, they just have fusses. Well, how many know that the letter F is not far from the letter C to little tiny boys? And when asked about the arguments that Mom and Daddy had, Rodney, in his little boy way, said, Mom and Daddy do not have fusses. They do not have fights. They have cusses. My dear friend, Brother England, had egg all over his face. Be careful. Be careful what you say in front of your children. Be careful what you say in front of your grandchildren. Be careful what you say in front of the little church children. Little children have big ears. And you know what? They never, ever forget anything. I went back to a church that I had pastored 30 years ago. And this big, tall bruiser of a guy, 275 pounds, muscular old man, he said to me, he said, Brother Cook, I remember every Sunday, whenever I would go out of the church, you would say to me, I'll hit you so hard, you'll starve to death before you quit rolling. I thought, what a thing to be remembered for. But yet, he loved me. He loved me. He knew I was teasing with him. I think he knew that. Of course, I wouldn't have hit David after he got this size for anything. Now you know the rest of the story.